Family was everything to him. To Bruce, family was the one place where everything felt settled and real. But while home brought him peace, the world outside was a very different story. Being a Chinese man in America during the 1960s and 70s meant facing rejection at almost every turn. Even with talent that was impossible to ignore, Bruce found Hollywood's doors consistently closed to him. Directors and producers turned him away, telling him he didn't have the right look for American audiences. When he auditioned for the lead role in the television series Kung Fu, a show he had personally helped inspire, he was told he couldn't be the one to carry it. The role went to a different actor instead. The reasoning given was that an Asian lead simply wouldn't connect with viewers. It infuriated Bruce. He knew his ability exceeded the people being cast ahead of him. He knew what he was capable of. But in an industry controlled by people who had already decided he was an outsider, talent alone wasn't enough to open doors. He didn't stop. He redirected. Rather than walking away, Bruce turned that frustration into fuel. He wrote his own scripts. He trained well-known celebrities in martial arts. He pushed himself harder than ever to make it impossible for the industry to keep looking past him. Linda stood beside him through every bit of it. She saw the weight he carried, the particular exhaustion that comes from being genuinely capable but never being given a fair opportunity. She watched him work himself to the edge of his limits day after day, refusing to slow down. But Bruce's growing reputation didn't just shake things up in Hollywood, it made certain people uncomfortable. He had proven that an Asian man could be a leading presence, powerful, compelling, and respected by audiences worldwide. And he spoke openly about the discrimination he had experienced. He wanted change, not just for himself, but for everyone who would come after him. He wasn't only teaching martial arts, he was teaching people to value themselves, to build inner strength, and to push back against systems designed to keep them in a limited place. As his influence grew, so did the resistance against him. Linda would later come to wonder whether certain forces had actively worked against Bruce, and whether those forces may have played a role in what eventually happened. What the world never saw.
More than a fighter, a threat to the system. The resistance Bruce faced wasn't only about his ethnicity or his screen presence. It was about his ideas, his energy, his absolute refusal to operate within the boundaries that had been set for him. The people who held power in Hollywood could see clearly what was happening. His philosophy was gaining ground. People were genuinely listening to him, not just watching his films, but absorbing his way of thinking about life, about limits, about what a person is truly capable of. Bruce Lee wasn't simply making action films, he was shaping how people thought about themselves, and that was a far more significant threat than any physical challenge he could have posed. Linda always carried a quiet question about whether that was the real reason things unfolded the way they did. If Bruce had simply stayed in his assigned lane, if he had been content to be another martial arts performer without the philosophy, without the message, without the refusal to be silent, perhaps things would have been different. But Bruce Lee was never built for silence, and that is precisely why, decades after his passing, the questions surrounding him have never fully settled. The final days. Bruce Lee was unstoppable, until suddenly he wasn't. In the days leading up to his death, something had shifted. Linda felt it clearly, even if she couldn't name it precisely. He was still training, still pushing himself at a pace that would have exhausted most people, but there were moments when his energy felt different. He spoke about the future with an urgency that hadn't been there before, almost as though he sensed that time was becoming shorter than it should have been. There were other things she noticed too. Phone calls that ended the moment she walked into the room, hushed conversations that stopped mid-sentence when she appeared. Bruce had always been careful about trust, but in those final weeks he seemed more watchful than usual, more aware of something she couldn't quite see. Then, on July 20th, 1973, everything stopped. Bruce had been at Betty Ting Pei's apartment that evening. He had mentioned a headache and taken a common painkiller before lying down to rest. Hours passed. He never woke up. The strongest, most physically capable man Linda had ever known was simply gone. The official medical explanation was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, attributed to an adverse reaction to the medication. An unfortunate accident, doctors said, nothing more. But that explanation never felt complete to the people who knew him, or to the millions who admired him from a distance. How does a young man in that physical condition, someone who had dedicated his entire existence to understanding and developing the human body, simply collapse without warning? The theories that never went away. Various explanations circulated in the years that followed. Some pointed to the extreme Hong Kong summer heat and the relentless physical demands Bruce had been placing on himself. Others raised more unsettling possibilities, that Bruce had made powerful enemies who had reason to want him gone. Hollywood figures who found his growing influence threatening. Traditional martial arts communities who deeply resented his public rejection of their rigid systems. Influential figures in Hong Kong who were uncomfortable with the level of attention and respect he was accumulating. Some accounts even suggested involvement from organized criminal networks operating in Hong Kong at the time. For decades, Linda dismissed all of it. She maintained consistently that Bruce's death was a tragic medical event, nothing more, nothing less. She focused her energy on raising their children and preserving his legacy in every way she could. But now, at 79 years old, she was saying something she had never said before. In those final days, something had frightened Bruce. He never said it to her directly, but she could feel it in the way he looked at her sometimes, in the way his body tensed when he thought she wasn't paying attention, in small moments that hadn't made complete sense at the time, but had stayed with her through 50 years of reflection. For decades, she had kept those observations locked away, buried beneath grief, responsibility, and the daily work of carrying his memory forward. But time changes perspective, and Linda had decided it was time to speak honestly about what she had seen and felt during those final weeks. What she chose to share about Bruce Lee's last chapter would shift the way many people understood his story entirely. Not just a fighter, something more. For decades, the world has understood Bruce Lee through a specific image, the martial arts icon, the impossibly fast mover, the man whose physical ability seemed to exist beyond normal human range, a legend defined by what his body could do. But according to the woman who knew him more completely than anyone alive ever, that image, while true, was never the whole picture. Linda Lee Cadwell had stayed largely quiet for many years, but what she finally chose to share reframes everything. Bruce Lee was not, at his core, a fighter. Yes, he trained with an intensity that pushed the boundaries of what the human body can achieve. Yes, his physical capabilities were genuinely extraordinary, but fighting was never his ultimate purpose. It was the vehicle he used to express something far deeper. His true passion was the human mind, personal growth, philosophy, the exploration of what people are actually capable of when they stop accepting the limits that have been placed on them. Martial arts was how he demonstrated that philosophy in a way the world could see and feel directly. Every technique, every principle, every movement was an expression of a deeper idea, that adaptability, resilience, and the freedom to think and move without unnecessary restriction are the fundamental keys to living fully. He read constantly and widely, pulling ideas from Eastern and Western philosophy, from psychology, from spiritual traditions across cultures. He believed that rigid thinking was ultimately what broke people, and that the willingness to stay open, to keep learning, and to adjust when circumstances demanded it was what made a person genuinely unbreakable. His message wasn't threatening to ordinary people. It was threatening to people in positions of established power. Because Bruce Lee wasn't simply a Hollywood star building a career, he was actively challenging the unspoken rules that governed who got to be seen, who got to be heard, and who got to occupy positions of influence and respect in the most powerful entertainment industry in the world. Hollywood had a clear and comfortable role in mind for someone like Bruce, the supporting character, the exotic background figure, the mystical presence who existed to make the real lead look more interesting. Bruce refused every version of that arrangement. He insisted on being seen fully, not just as a supporting element in someone else's story, but as a complete human being with his own voice, his own vision, and his own right to occupy the center of the frame. That insistence, combined with the growing reality that millions of people around the world were responding to him, made him genuinely uncomfortable to certain people who had significant reasons to prefer things stayed exactly as they were.